Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Protect Your Customers from BankBot. My name is Allison, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our event is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the event. If you have a question, please submit it via the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many as time permits. We will also be recording this session, and we'll email out after the event. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today, JT Keating. JT?
Thank you very much, Allison. I appreciate that. I would like to thank everybody for spending a little bit of time with us. This is a bit of a reprisal of a presentation we did at the tail end of last year, particularly for some of our customers in the Middle East, as BankBot had started making its way that direction. So without further ado, what I will do is step into this. As Allison mentioned, we will kind of run through BankBot, talk about the nature of it, and talk about the fact that it's actually even starting to spin up some copycats. And you know, it's, for me, as somebody who's been in security for a number of years, there's a couple things that have been fascinating for me. One of which is, you know, human beings are still our greatest security risk, is one. Two is, it's amazing to me how sophisticated phishing has come, and BankBot, when you really get down to it, is a very elegant, in a weird way, example of a phishing attack. And it's not totally dissimilar from the phishing stuff that we've been facing ever since, you know, the early 2000s, basically. So let's dive in. And as Allison pointed out, we will be having questions and answers at the tail end of this. So feel free to use the Q&A to shoot it over. So let's start off with, what exactly is BankBot? BankBot is Android focused. It is Android targeting. As most of you probably know, there are pretty major differences between traditional endpoints and mobile when it comes to many things. There's three primary differences right off the bat. One is the user is the admin. Even if you're talking about corporate-owned devices, quite often there is no concept of a patch management system and the like. It's the user that decides when they're going to patch or not. And we have significant amount of research that indicates that quite often they don't. They're the ones who decide what networks they're going to wander in and out of, including rogue Wi-Fi networks that they might not even realize. And they're the ones who decide what apps are going to be downloaded and how. So we're going to be stepping through part of that. The second thing that's different in mobile compared to traditional endpoints is the fact that no solutions, legitimate solutions, including security solutions, are supposed to play around in the kernel of the operating system. Unlike, again, you know, traditional next-generation antivirus stuff, which could link into the kernel, you can't do that in mobile. And then the third part is that apps don't get to jack around with other apps as a general rule. And in one of the differences between Android and iOS is, in Android, there is one thing that apps can do that you can't in iOS, and that is you can actually see other apps. So you can actually pull down other apps and take a look at them as you go forward. So with that as a precursor, BankBot is Android targeting malware. The fundamental concept, as I mentioned earlier, when you boil it down, is it's a fish, which we're going to show you, a very elegant fish designed to steal user credentials. But because of the capabilities that it has now, it could actually be used to do some other stuff as well, which we'll talk about. So the device requirements for BankBot, these have evolved over time, as I'll show you here in a couple phases. First, it has to be a real device. They actually have some capabilities in there to ensure it's not something that is being, you know, spoofed in order to detect them. Currently, it has to be outside of the former Soviet Union. That wasn't the way that it was to start off with. You need to be able to have unknown sources enabled, which is a setting in Android that enables you to be able to pull things from more than just the Play Store. And then it needs the app of a targeted, I say bank here, but we know that it's actually extending beyond banks to other financial institutions, and then we believe before too long it's going to be to retail, because it's actually set up in a way that's very templatized, which we'll talk about here. I mentioned that that today the devices have to be outside of the former Soviet Union, the CIS nations, if you will. When we've actually followed BankBot cruising around the world, phase one only operated in Russia, basically. That didn't happen for very long, though. So it leads some people to believe that there's a very good possibility that BankBot has been originated in those countries. We saw it next move to the Middle East, hence the reason I mentioned the webinar that we were doing just a little while ago. And then now it is moving to, at last count, it was well over 3 or 4 dozen countries that had moved to, and hundreds of financial institutions. So, and by the way, I apologize if there's a little bit of noise. Marriott decided that today would be the right day to start remodeling the hotel that I'm in. So hopefully it won't be too bad for y'all. So here are the steps for BankBot. The first thing it does is the user will install a utility app. It's usually some kind of a free app. It could be a flashlight, it could be a level, it could be anything along those lines. They install that utility app usually from outside of the Play Store. It's, again, third-party stores and the like. So they have their utility, and it gets installed, and it can, just do whatever the utility happens to be. Pretty simple stuff. The first thing BankBot does, which is installed within that utility, is, as I mentioned, in Android, apps can start looking around for other apps. So in this case, it looks around to see whether or not any of its targeted banks' applications are on that device. In this case, we're using BNP or BNB just as an example. But like I said, it's got a pretty significant list. Once it determines, yes, in fact, one of my target banks apps is sitting on this device, then what it does is it goes out to its CNC server and basically says, hey, send me the template for, in this case, BNB. So it literally goes back out and pulls in the most updated template of what that looks like. Then what it does is it waits and monitors for target app launch. Now, what has happened since last fall is a step kind of in between the two of these, where one of the things it does actually when you're installing, and I should have mentioned this earlier, when you're installing the utility, it gives you the standard set of questions of, it would like to be able to do this, would like to be able to do that. What it's basically doing is elevating its privileges on the device. And so now, as a part of that, it is able to actually monitor across and is able to stick itself into the middle of this process. When it first came out, and this is, we all know the game, that it continues to morph and continues to evolve, just like attacks always do. When it first came out, it took advantage of the ADA settings, the folks with blind and disability settings, and was able to take advantage of that as a service. Google shut that part down, and so it's still wanted to continue doing its business. So now what it's done is actually elevate privileges, and when people just click because they just don't pay attention to that stuff, they've actually now given it the authority to do stuff that it shouldn't actually have. So now it sits there and it monitors for the target app launching on the device. Once that somebody clicks on it and says, I'm going to open that, it takes advantage of its elevated privileges now, and it literally puts the perfect template directly over it. I was on a panel at the BlackBerry Security Summit a little while back, and we were having an active debate with the audience, and somebody was talking about, we just need to educate our users on, not paying attention to phishing, and philosophically, I agree with him, but when it comes to things like BankBot, it's pretty hard to notice the difference because it is literally an exact template of the mobile banking app. So it's now put right on top of it, and as phishing will do, the user literally provides their credentials to the people, and then they log in. So actually, let me just do this. Something else we've been starting to notice is that some of the most recent versions of BankBot have actually, the original ones, you would put it in, they'd say, think you got your password incorrect. And then they would get out of the way, and the new stuff would, then you put your information back in again, and then you'd be off to the races. Some of the new things that we've seen, when you actually go in and do it, BankBot will actually log you into the legitimate app, and that way they're verifying the fact that the credentials are actually accurate. What we've seen in the UAE, and I think this will occur in other places that have additional forms like two-factor type authentication, multiple steps in the authentication process. For some of the banks in the UAE, what it would do is it would follow the usual workflow that the consumers are used to, which is the need to be able to send a PIN code, take the PIN code, use that to log in. And then once they did that, then they would have the people actually input their details twice to make sure that the credentials work. But fundamentally, what this is all about is it is basically initially untargeted, and then once this thing gets on the device, then they just keep adding to their list of places that they are phishing from. Like we said, when we've seen it originally, it was only in Russia. Then it was a handful of banks. Now it's well over 400 banks that are they're on that list. One of the things that we talk about a lot, because we're one of the leaders in mobile security, particularly protecting enterprises and their customers, but enterprises is our primary focus. When it comes to mobile, I mentioned that there's some things that are different, including the fact that apps cannot play around with other apps as a general rule. So with that, their Gartner and all the rest of us that are in this space, we always talk about the DNA of mobile security because it is a little bit different. There's device attacks, network attacks, and malicious apps. Somewhat unlike the traditional endpoint world, apps are either designed like BankBot to conduct fraud of some sort, whether it's advertising or financial, things on those lines, or they're used as a conduit. In security, there's some time-tested rules, right? One of those time-tested rules is if I'm a hacker and if I'm going to take the time to compromise, to take over your device, I want to be persistent. I want to be able to remain after reboot, things on those lines, which is why in the traditional world, traditional endpoints, a lot of times the systems that have already been compromised are ones that are patched and they look perfect from the outside because the software, the malicious software will actually patch, for them because they actually want the systems to look clean and not attract any attention. They also want to prevent other folks from coming in and trying to play king of the hill, right? Well, in mobile, the key is always to compromise the device. That is the only way to be persistent. So malicious apps are untargeted. If I'm targeting, let's say, if I'm actually targeting a defense contractor, I'm not going to drop an app in the App Store and hope that somebody downloads it that works at that place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a network attack predominantly, a man-in-the-middle rogue access point, something where I can actually survey the traffic and say, this is XYZ defense contractor. And then I will actually deliver an exploit or elevate privileges in order to maintain a persistent foothold. So BankBot is designed clearly right up front, without question, to conduct fraud. That is the objective. It is to steal credentials of online banking predominantly today, although again, there's no reason to believe that the model of simple phishing and templates and everything couldn't be extended to retail and going beyond that. So its job one is conduct this fraud, right? But even BankBot can do more. Because now that it has elevated its privileges by people just saying, yes, go ahead, let me, it can do all sorts of different stuff. We have, extensive threat demos and everything that we talk about all the time, and we show all the time. And there's all sorts of public examples of this out there. I mean, even in the last, 2-3 months, we've seen everything from, the the folks in Iran being accused of hacking the mobile devices of the guys in Britain. We've seen examples of where Russia put a rogue access point on top of drones and flew them around NATO bases, and 4,000 soldiers' phones connected and were compromised. We've seen all these different examples of things going on, which are examples of these exploits. BankBot can do a lot of those. It could send messages. It can make calls. It basically can do anything that the user can do because it is now elevated as privilege quite often, to, in some cases, not necessarily BankBots, higher than the capabilities that a traditional user would have. So stepping back for a second, and we're going to stop for a quick poll just to kind of summarize. BankBot is very simple, but very powerful. It starts off by somebody downloading utility from outside of the Play Store. Inside of that utility is BankBot. It will deliver the template that is required for that particular bank. When somebody does it, clicks on it, then it will pull it up. And oh, by the way, it's got the ability to be even more nefarious than that. So we have a quick poll here, as you guys can see. And the question is pretty simple and straightforward. Has your organization, or we know that we've got some folks on the phone that are from systems integrators and other partners, has either your organization, or if you're helping another organization, been affected by BankBot? So I'll stop for a couple seconds and let everybody fill in their answers. And then Allison, whenever you feel it's a good time, then you can show us the results.
Sounds good.
Let us see what it says. Okay, so far, you see, this is pretty interesting. It's also kind of interesting that between the know and the don't know, I think, and granted, we're dealing with a lot of relatively small numbers here, but obviously, between the know and the don't know, that's pretty interesting. The don't knows in mobile security quite often hover around 50% whenever we talk about these things. And a large chunk of that is because a lot of people don't have any instrumentation and any visibility into it. But we do have one person who says that they were impacted by BankBot. And so obviously they're probably pretty familiar with this side of things. I'm going to be interested in some of the questions coming from there. So this conversation is really to educate people on the way that malicious software, and particularly this phishing-based software, BankBot, operates. But we did want to spend just a couple minutes to basically say, okay, can we do anything about this, right? So basically, Zimperium, what we are is we're a mobile security company, and particularly a mobile security company that has been built from the ground up to protect enterprises. We have one core engine that is actually machine learning based engine, so it can detect not only known threats but unknown threats as well across DNA. Particularly the A on device part is in the Android world, because again, we can see the apps, and so we can determine whether or not they are malicious. So we have this one core engine called Z9. We put Z9 out in one of two different ways. We either put it out in what's called ZIPS, which stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. That is literally like next generation antivirus for mobile devices. So if you have an employee devices, that is designed, ZIPS is designed to run 100% of the time and protect the device and all the data that's on the device and the access from that device. We also, though, can take Z9, and we have an SDK, software development kit, where we can drop Z9 in what we call ZIAP, in-app protection. It is literally an SDK where you can drop the entire capabilities of Z9 directly into a mobile app. And so in that mobile app, now you're not trying to protect the device 100% of the time. You're trying to protect that session. So, obviously, we have one customer, for instance, that is using ZIPS to protect a couple 100,000 of their employees all the time, and they're putting ZIAP in to protect millions of mobile banking customers. So you've got these two different use cases. When it comes to the BankBot side, the primary one is the ZIAP side, right? How do I protect my apps? And as I was mentioning, this thing here is usually a little bit of a build, but I didn't want to bug you. It was an example that we use of a Bitcoin app, where if that Bitcoin app has ZIAP installed, so it has Z9, and Z9 is detecting all of the device, network, and app attacks in real time, then it can actually self-defend itself. With a Bitcoin wallet, whoever's got access to that wallet gets access to the coins, right? So you need to be able to respond in real time to protect yourself. This is just showing one potential workflow. With ZIAP, we actually can put it into the mobile app in a matter of minutes. Then we work with the developer to basically say, what do you want to happen when we detect something, right? So in the case of BankBot, with ZIAP installed in it, it could detect that threat. And then depending on the policy that each institution wanted to take, a couple examples are, the first thing you could do is immediately terminate the session, because in BankBot's case in particular, we would detect that was on there once that person went to initiate the app. But that means BankBot probably would have already done its initial phishing, because it was looking at the same time we were looking. Again, this isn't Zips where we're running 100% of the time. This is when we're, for instance, let's say if we were in the BNB mobile app. Since we're in the BNB mobile app, it's only when they click to activate it that we would wake up and look around and go, hey, do we see anything bad here, right? So in this case, you could terminate session, you could flag the account, you could notify the user, you need to call to reset your password. We think there might be some malicious activity, whatever the case may be. But it requires like a real-time on-device capability in that app to be able to detect these things before they've executed and vanished, like BankBot can do. And then just a couple, kind of commentaries on that. Chris Marsh is the research director for 451. He was talking about the fact that this protection works out, perfectly for this. And then, one of our financial institutions was basically talking about the whole use case. We're worried about fraud. We're worried about, our mobile banking customers' safety, and we want to protect them any way we can. This is a very fast, very powerful, very simple way of doing that. So with that is all the slides that we've got. So now what we can do is, Allison, if we can shift over and just do the Q&A. Our focus here is to get the information out to you guys as quickly as possible, and then field questions. And then obviously we're always available for, more in-depth conversations with anybody.
Sure. Okay, got a couple questions here. The first one is, who maintains the list of affected banks? Do banks voluntarily share information when they have been impersonated? That's
a good question. Matter of fact, one of the things that I've been meaning to do, and frankly just haven't had a chance to go out and do it, is talk to the guys in the FS-ISAC, the Financial Services ISAC, to see how much information they're sharing about being on this list. Each time a new version of BankBot gets detected, one of the first things the researchers do is actually kind of break it open and see what are the targeted apps that are on there. How they're going about doing the sharing, I would hope it's to the FS-ISAC, but I'm not sure for 100%. Obviously, if we discover that somebody's on there, we like to reach out and tell them that, not just from the standpoint of that we're trying to sell software, but because one of our fundamental beliefs is we want the entire mobile ecosystem to be safer, which is why, for instance, when we do machine learning-based detection of any malware, we will immediately notify, like we've notified Google, we've notified Facebook, we provide it to VirusTotal, and even some of our competitors are using the stuff we've discovered and put into VirusTotal because we're trying to make this a safer world. So when we come across this, we want to make sure that the institutions know, and then it's going to be up to them to kind of figure out what is their strategy for remediation, ZIAP obviously just being one of them.
Great. Next question is, does Z9's machine learning get shared back to the cloud and deployed to other devices running Z9? Can what one device learns be shared to the collective?
Yeah, so great question. So one of the big differences between Zimperium and some of our brethren is we fundamentally believe in that. Again, we start off with the concept of saying you need to protect the device from a compromise, because if I compromise the device, I own that device, and it's pretty much game over. We fundamentally believe that the primary way of doing that initially was network-based scans. So I can sit in a coffee shop across from XYZ company and determine who works there and then be able to compromise their device. I can also augment that with phishing, but the ultimate objective is to compromise that device. But because man-in-the-middle attacks are a primary way of attacking, we did not feel comfortable having all of our detection being done in the cloud. So what we do, and we're actually coming out with a new white paper. It's actually going to be on the site here in the next couple of days. So, and we can provide it to everybody. Matter of fact, Allison, we might just want to do that to everybody that's on the call. It describes our machine learning approach. So specific to the question, we train up in the cloud, billions of data points from millions and millions of devices over years and years and years. We actually do the machine learning training up in the cloud. Once, to simplify the entire process, the paper goes into more detail. Once we figure out the right combination of what system elements can accurately predict a particular D, N, or A attack, we take that small classifier. So we're not doing machine learning on the device. What we're doing is we're doing machine learning-based detection on the device based on all the training up in the cloud. So it starts off with us doing all the training up there. We create these classifiers. We put the classifiers down on all of the ZIAP or ZIPS protected devices. When we detect something, that information does come up to the cloud. The forensics part comes up to the cloud for us to determine, is there other things that we would like to do to continue to enhance the training and the efficacy. But the cool part is we don't have to get into a race against time of, okay, we detected BankBot 123. We have to now get that signature, for lack of a better term, out to all these devices to detect BankBot 123. That's not the race we're in. So, for instance, I was talking to a company here in the States just last week, and they said, okay, we understand that SoftBank, security checker in SoftBank, a major telco, an investor of ours out in Japan, their product for consumers is Z9 inside of it. It's ZIPS, basically, for consumers. So they said, if we detect something in Japan, how do we get that information over here to me in the States? And the answer is you don't have to, because anything that got detected by Z9 in Japan is going to be detected by Z9 in the States. It's going to be detected by Z9 in UAE, because it's the exact same engine. So we're going to, might be more information than you were looking for, but we continue to refine it and modify it. But the detection itself is the same everywhere Z9 is.
Great, thanks for that one, JT. Next question is, so basically BankBot can recognize and distinguish between different processes of all the running apps in the Android-based phone.
Yes, because it is elevated privileges. What it's doing is, and I don't know about all of the running apps, but what it's doing is it's specifically saying, okay, I'm looking for this particular app. So now I know that BMB, that's the app, that's the one that I'm focusing on.
Great. And then follow up to that one is, and after it obtains all the credentials, can the bank just reverse the transactions back into the account?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And again, great question. They can definitely do that. But the best part of this is from a proactive standpoint now, the bank has noticed that there's something that's going wrong. The bank is taking proactive measures even before the user figures it out. I think we've all probably been, I know I was, I had my credit card stolen when I was on vacation in Tahoe, and they used it to buy mattresses in Miami. I never quite figured that one out, but, made it pretty easy for the police to catch them. But it was only when I actually looked at my bank account and saw it that started the entire process. In this case, you're absolutely right. The bank can reverse out the transaction if a transaction even occurred, because quite often with BankBot, they're taking advantage of the credentials and then they're logging back out because they're not actually controlling the mobile banking session. They would go log in another place. So hopefully you can even head it off in the first place.
This question is kind of related to that one. What's typical length of time between a consumer's credentials being stolen and their account being accessed?
I don't really have factual data on it. All I have is anecdotal data from talking to some of our customers and prospects. And they say that it is a matter of hours as a general rule, because they want to make sure that they compromise it and capitalize on it as quickly as possible, and also figure out whether it worked or not. So it's usually within a matter of hours, but I don't have any hard facts on it.
Great. And that's all the questions we have.
Well, thank you all very much. I definitely appreciate your time. As we mentioned, we make the slides available. We'd also make the white paper available to everybody here. And if you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out, and we'd be more than happy to help you all.
Thank you, everyone.